0 to 100 is a podcast dedicated to bringing you quality conversations and insights on resiliency in physical, mental, social, and spiritual fitness through engaging discussions with those in the military and beyond.
Well, hello and welcome to the podcast. My name is Steven. I'm joined by my fellow host, Mark. And today we are super excited because we're going to be speaking with Dennis Volpe. And I knew Dennis years ago in Mayport, Florida, where I was serving as a chaplain with the Mayport Ministry Center. And at that point in time, Dennis and I got to know each other simply as I was one of the chaplains serving him as one of the ships in the Mayport Basin, if you will, as we were all kind of deploying and coming back, and in a very interesting time where we were doing deployments over into the Mediterranean area to Fifth and Sixth Fleet area of operations. But before I go any further with that, just want to say welcome, Dennis, to the podcast. We're glad you could be with us today.
Thanks, Stephen and Mark. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. And so to give a little, if you will, just framework of what we're going to be talking about today. So Dennis is currently a resiliency coach. I'm going to let him describe that a little bit later. And that's his career now after having a career in the United States Navy. But before we get to all of that, I want to just, Dennis, give you an opportunity to just, if you will, just give a little bit of your bio, just kind of where you've been, where you are now, so that the listeners can understand that background for you and kind of where you're at now in your stage of life.
Sure. Well, I won't spend too much time, back, at the very, very beginning. But I'm a simple kid from Long Island, New York. I'm the son of a combat infantry Marine from Vietnam. I was lucky enough to go to the United States Naval Academy, and I started there, as a midshipman who played lacrosse. I left as a midshipman who played rugby, and learned a lot of life lessons on the those sporting fields in Annapolis, as well as the halls of Bancroft Hall. And so now, I service selected surface warfare. So I was a career surface warfare officer, had the opportunity to do a lot of cool stuff with a lot of amazing people, and have a lot of, mentors that I still depend on today. Got to, I started in the anti-submarine arena, and then I was a department head in the anti-air arena. Before I was a department head, I was lucky enough to go back to the Naval Academy as a leadership instructor, and getting to do that was, getting the opportunity to not only teach but interact with the next generation of Navy and Marine Corps officers was an awesome experience. And then went on to after my department head tour, I had the opportunity to go to the Naval Command and Staff College, where I was lucky enough as a SWO to get a subspecialty in counterinsurgency, which meant that they were sending me to Afghanistan. A ship driver, really, really far away from water, but with a subspecialty in counterinsurgency. So I spent a year with the Army. I like to say that was my Navy appreciation tour, because they definitely do things a bit differently than we do. And while I was there, I got screened for command. And so I went from there to the command pipeline in Newport, and then reported to the USS Taylor as the executive officer. Did that for a year and a half, and then took command in November of 2012. So got to do a lot of cool stuff, from deploying to the Mediterranean, then the Black Sea, to deploying to the Caribbean, doing counter drug stuff, going to the Horn of Africa, doing counter piracy, doing the battle group stuff in the Persian Gulf, and so got to do a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah, that's great. Hey, thanks for giving us that background. And so, in just a minute, for our listeners, we're going to hear your story of kind of what happened right there as you were in command of USS Taylor. But before we get to that, just real quickly now, give us a description of your job now.
Yeah, right now I am a principal leadership consultant and executive performance coach with the Leadership Research Institute, which is a small international consulting and coaching company with the mission of transforming leaders in order to transform the world. And we focus on both one-on-one as well as team coaching opportunities in order to work with leaders and their teams to get them to be more focused and more engaged in the work they do. So that way they could be more efficient, effective, and engaged in what they're doing and how they're doing it.
Awesome.
Dennis, I got a question about coaching while we're on the subject and kind of better introducing your specialty right now. There's a lot of people, especially who are not familiar with coaching, who they see it as like very vague and nebulous. It's like, well, not I don't need somebody to tell me platitudes, or there's some resistance to that, mainly because I don't think they understand it well, right? So I'm sure you've come across the naysayers. What's kind of your typical or your most effective address to that?
Yeah, and it's an interesting question because to your point, Mark, the coaching industry is really interesting right now because it is, in fact, unregulated. And so anybody could be a coach. They just need to change, their LinkedIn profile and say, hey, I'm a coach. So that's why I think there's a lot of the naysayers that are out there. But why do people need coaches? Well, what is coaching? I think that's where you need to start. And coaching is about unlocking human performance. So it doesn't matter if it's on a rugby pitch, a lacrosse field, or a boardroom, or a manufacturing floor. What you're trying to do is identify the barriers and the challenges that exist and provide the time and space to figure out the options and the actions that are required. But what it really requires is taking the time to identify what really matters and what people value, what they expect of themselves and others, and what they want to prioritize for the here and now. So that way they could focus their energy, their attention, and their effort on what matters.
Okay, I like the whole human performance focus. Now, there's a lot of other disciplines that kind of overlap there, right? Whether it's mental health professionals, mentors, you have even like friends, right? That can kind of
Sure.
speak into some of those things. And you have religious clergy who are also influencing that. So where do you guys feel that coaching sort of has its own space or need to be there without being redundant?
Right. And I can tell you, Mark, one of the biggest struggles that I had, because I went through the Columbia University coaching program to be a certified coach. I was on the struggle bus because I thought consulting and coaching were kind of the same thing. And they're not. And I think that goes into some of the other arenas that you talked about, because consulting and even mentoring, you're basically solving somebody else's problems, right? You're literally taking their problems, putting them in your pack and figuring it out for them. Whereas coaching is providing the insight, the perspective, the support, and accountability to help people solve their own problems. I think that's the key difference. Because as a consultant or as a mentor or as the two of you, clergy, mental health professionals, very often you are providing the answers. Whereas in the coaching space, you're providing the time and space and the exploratory journey for someone to figure out the answers for themselves. So that way there's a greater level of commitment when that focused action is going to be taken.
Yeah, that's great. Well, to get us on track for this first 30-minute segment, if you will, take us back to, as you said, you took command there November 2012, Mayport, Florida, USS Taylor, and just bring us through that journey that you went through. that really changed the course and direction, if you will, of your naval career? And take us through that story, if you will.
Yeah. And if it's okay, Stephen, I'll rewind the clock a little bit because I think it's germane to the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I went to the Naval Academy. I did the standard division officer stuff on a Spruance class destroyer, and I was a ship handler of the year, and as a result, had the opportunity to get some really good fitness reports, and then got selected to go to the Naval Academy. And when I was at the Naval Academy, I was the #1 leadership instructor when I was there. And then when I went on to be a department head, I was a Navy and Marine Corps Leadership Award winner. And I was also an Arleigh Burke Award winner for outstanding operational excellence. And so in terms of technical skill and operational credibility, I had that. And so now fast forward, took command, went through the standard, training cycle to get certified for deployment. You remember what those days were like, and we did really well. We were, in terms of certification numbers, we had the highest of any frigate on the East Coast. And then we deployed, and we got tasked with a national tasking mission to support the 2014 Sochi Olympics. So went into the Black Sea, and we were off the Sochi coast, providing maritime presence. And I like to say we were close enough to the Russian coast that they were not happy we were there. We were close enough that you could actually see the Olympic torch in the foreground of the Sochi Mountains, and close enough that the leadership, both military and civilian, here back in the States was interested in what we were doing and how we were doing it. So for a ship captain, absolutely on top of the world. And we were there for a little over a week, and doing really good stuff. And then we had the check off station to go for gas and groceries on the other side of the Black Sea in a port called Samsun, Turkey. And as we were entering the harbor, we had an operational mishap. We were about 50 yards right of track and ended up running aground, breaking the propeller, and being deemed non-mission capable during a time of heightened tensions in the Black Sea. Fast forward about 2 weeks, while we were in port trying to get things fixed, there was an investigation, and there was absolutely culpability. And as a ship captain, you are always responsible, and you are always accountable for the inactions or actions of your crew. And as a result, I was relieved of command, and rightly so. And but that then led into about a 2-year journey of whether or not I was going to be allowed to stay in the service, what my retirement grade was going to be, and everything else. And the biggest thing from a resilience perspective was it really challenged me to look at my role versus identity, right? Who I was and why it mattered, and what was that going to do? Because up to that point in my life, from the time I was 18, the time I was 40, the military was all I knew. So my role was my identity, and my identity was the role that I had. And really trying to break those two things apart was a tough exercise. So when I think about that period of time, there was a lot of things that were going on in my life too, and I don't know that I shared it with you. I took command in November of 2012. And my father passed away in January 2013. And then I went on deployment. So you think about some stressful events. Taking command is a pretty stressful thing. Having a close family member pass away, that's a pretty stressful thing. Going on deployment, pretty stressful thing. And even before I went on deployment, I had one of my lifelong mentors pass away unexpectedly of a heart attack after he went surfing off of Mayport Naval Station. And then you're deployed, which is obviously for a ship captain a pretty stressful opportunity, and then getting relieved of command. Because you go from being, like I said, as a ship captain, you're on the top of the world. Mm-hmm. Well, then you lose your identity, and you're in probably one of the most loneliest valleys, personally and professionally. And then you got to figure it out. Yeah. So I'll stop there because you probably have a question or two.
No, that's great. Yeah. No, absolutely. Probably one of the first thing that pops to my mind, as you mentioned, going through that valley of despair, if you will, that now you're wrestling with your identity and all of that. First thing that pops into my mind is mental fitness. Like, what if mentally, did you go through some time of maybe of some depression, of just like, my goodness, what's, that, if you will, kind of, like I would imagine if I was just putting myself in your shoes, I would probably be saying to myself, now if you will, you're having to let go of the past, right? Like you said, you're on top of the world and everything's and you're realizing now that future as a naval officer, that particular career path is coming to an end. What would you say your thoughts are on that?
No, I think you're spot on. Did I have bouts of depression? I don't know. And the reason I don't know is because there was some days where, I know I wasn't myself. I know that I wasn't thinking clearly or anything. And I didn't get all the way there. But one of the things that I like to say now is one of the best parts of hitting rock bottom is that it provides one of the most solid foundations to launch in a positive direction. And that's what that experience provided me, is an opportunity to say, you know what, this is a personal story, but it's not a unique story. Because there's lots of people that go through hard times. They go through crucible experiences that at the end of the day are going to define them. How you deal with that change, how you deal with that crucible is what you're going to be remembered by, not the crucible event itself.
As you mentioned that foundation that you found yourself landing on, what would you say that is for you? What made up that foundation that allowed you to go, okay, boom, okay, here I am. Now I know I can start building on this.
I would say I think there's a couple of things. First, the people in my life, my family and my friends, and having that close personal network that provides that support. I now call it your QRF, having your own quick reaction force that you could literally call any time of the day or night, and you're going to get the insight, you're going to get the perspective, and you're going to get the support that you want, but you're also going to get the accountability that you need. But it's up to you to let them know whether it's a red flare day, a yellow flare day, or a green flare day.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Right? Because it requires openness and vulnerability. So that's another part of that foundation, is making sure that you're open enough and you're vulnerable enough to let people know what help you need. And that was probably one of the biggest lessons that I learned. And then the other part that goes back to that mental fitness piece is that positive motion creates positive emotion. Mm-hmm. And that's when I got introduced to the sport of triathlon.
Oh. Mark, you got a question?
Yeah, that's a great quote. Positive motion it creates positive emotion. I want to go back a little bit to when you separated. Was it work or was it your career versus identity, right? And I think that's a very pivotal tension that so many service members wrestle with, because the service trains you to make your career your identity. It's kind of the carrot they dangle, right? And man, you are being primed to be admiral one day. I mean, clearly, like your career track. And the more you took it on as your identity, the better you probably perform, right? Because that's what the institution wanted. That's how the institution works. And yet, when the institution kind of said, "Okay, we changed our mind," you had to now wrestle with, the broken pieces. So, if I'm sure you've mentored many others who are kind of in a similar situation, or I'm sure you look back, what do you think would have made a difference if you had gone through that with what you know now, in terms of the identity and career piece? Like, how would you have parsed that differently, or trained that differently?
Yeah. And I mean, great question. And, I think about when you're in command, you're actually, particularly in the surface fleet, you're actually known by your ship name, right? When you go to work, it's ding, 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 whatever ship name arriving. So that becomes your identity. So that way you have the opportunity to really be engaged in it. And if I were to do it all over again, it would be, when I look at resilience, and it's very similar to the way the Marine Corps looks at it. There's a mental piece to it. There's a physical piece to it. There's a social piece to it, and there's a spiritual piece to it. What I didn't do a lot of is the mental side of things, in terms of making sure that I had a really good mindfulness routine. There were certain things that I did on a daily basis that were helpful, but I never really took the time to, I like to call it the 4 R's of resilience, right? I didn't take intentional time to relax, to recharge, and then reconnect with myself and those who mattered to me before I re-engaged everything. And it was a confusion between resilience and endurance. And I think that the key difference is that resilience is endurance with emotional intelligence. Because endurance, that mental toughness, that grit and everything else, that's part of resilience. But the key to understanding resilience is having that self-awareness about what really matters to you and focusing your energy, your attention, and your effort on that stuff, but also having that awareness to know when that grit, that endurance, that mental toughness is no longer serving you in a positive direction, so you could pivot to something different. And it's not about changing your why, right? Because that's not what we're going to do, right? Our sense of purpose is always going to be there. But it's that sense, it's changing your how. How am I going to get to that purpose? How am I going to satisfy that purpose? That's what resilience provides us.
Do you think I love that answer. That's just really insightful. Do you think it's possible for people 16 years in, 18 years in, second command, '06 command, whatever, right? Or senior enlisted in their own track, kind of sort of set in their ways. Is it possible to get them sort of rethinking this and applying new habits without them hitting bottom? Have you seen that?
I think it is. And I'm really lucky enough to be able to mentor a few ship captains still. And we have those conversations often. And that's the key thing. And it goes back to that tribe, right? Making sure that, the difference between mentors and sponsors and all that stuff, but having those mentors, having those trusted advisors in your corner that can provide that perspective to say, hey, Mark, are you really thinking about this the right way? And what else needs to be part of your solution? And is it spending more time with the family? Is it, taking up some of those hobbies that haven't been part of your reality for the past 10 years? Or who are those people that not only provide you positive energy, but challenge you to be better today than you were yesterday? Or who are those people that really drain your battery, that don't need to be part of your reality. So thinking about things holistically and making sure that you have some sort of mindfulness routine, making sure, the military requires us to be physically fit, right? But are you doing those things that you enjoy physically? And then making sure that there's that social side, that social connection piece, not only for support, but for energy purposes. And then always revisiting, well, why are you doing what you're doing? Okay. And making sure you know that why. So to provide a very short answer to your question, yes, I think it's possible. How do you do it is what I talked about.
Yeah, no, that's great. And it's even greater to hear that you're actually doing that with ship's captains and others, people who have such a wide level of influence. And hopefully that's something they could pass on, right? Not just have great command and mission execution, but actually affect the lives of younger sailors and Marines that they're in charge of. Have you had a different response or seen different things when it comes to more junior people? Like, is it easier? Are they actually taking this on better? Because I know the Navy actually right now is trying to start a coaching program. They just put out, right, the message a few months ago. I was actually looking into it just to get trained out of curiosity, but I just couldn't make the time commitments. So there is obviously this recognition that the coaching benefits really meet something that's not that being met within the traditional military leadership enterprise. So I'd like to hear more of the junior folks. Like, what's your experience so far with them?
So I haven't had too much experience with them, except for a lot of the pro bono work I do. And the pro bono work I do is actually for transitioning veterans. So I do a fair amount of work with American corporate partners in their veteran mentorship program, as well as Camp Southern Ground and their Warrior Week program, and the Veterati folks. And I've had the opportunity to work with some junior folks there, and they understand the mindfulness piece a little bit better, I think, than the senior folks. And I think it's a mindset piece to realize that, hey, you know what? There actually can be a better way. And it's one of those things. It's just having that awareness that there is a better way. We don't have to do things just because this is the way they've always been done for the past 180 years.
Actually, Mark, I was just thinking the same thing as you thought about the junior folk, and one thing that popped in my mind to ask you, Dennis, was as you reflect now back on everything that you've learned, if you could go back in time and be the ship's captain again, how would the lessons that you've learned change how you lead your crew?
That's a great question. I think the biggest piece was that allowed me to really impact my crew was the constant emphasis of purpose and mission. Right, so that's part of that resilience piece, and we made time for obviously physical wellness, but probably trying to find, if it even exists, the time and space for sailors to really connect with each other. And I don't want to call it mindfulness retreats on a ship, because you don't, but just having the opportunity to look for empty space so they can have that time to recharge and relax and reconnect with themselves.
Yeah. No, that's great. As a matter of fact, there was a commanding officer that I was working with on the Marine Corps side that the same thing, he had the same idea that he wanted to give his Marines time every day to work on their spiritual fitness, right? So whether you do that with just, mindfulness routine, or whether that's just listening to some music, whatever that is, or if it's reading of a book, if it's prayer, if it's religiously oriented. And that was one thing that I was working with him on and encouraged him to do, is to communicate to his Marines to say, hey, beginning of your day, just take 5 minutes if you can, how many time you can start your day with, to say, all right, I need to ground myself before I get going. So, well, this brings us to the end of our first segment. Thank you so much, Dennis, for all of your comments. We're going to pick it right up, this conversation, in the next segment. So for our listeners, don't go away. You can just click play on the next podcast, if you will. And we're going to continue the conversation, where we're now going to look at the story that Dennis is going to tell us of what happened after those events with the ship and that next phase of his journey. So join us back in just a few minutes, and we will continue our conversation. Okay, well, welcome back to the podcast. We are on session number 2 now with Dennis Volpe, a prior Navy commander, a commanding officer of USS Taylor, now a resiliency coach. And if you're just joining us, don't hesitate to jump back and listen to the podcast right before this one. But in this segment, we're going to ask Dennis to just continue his story, telling us a little bit about his journey after the ship having run aground while on deployment. He's then brought back to the States. And Dennis, if you would just pick up the story there and tell us how that next couple of years of your life unfolded.
Sure. No, I appreciate the opportunity, Stephen. I think it's interesting kind of how, things happened in Turkey. I think it's important. No one let me know that the Commodore was coming or anything like that, even though I asked. And you basically, you were told that he was coming the next day to relieve you of command, which, like I talked about, was absolutely warranted. So you had to pack your stuff up into like 4 or 5 sea bags, and then you went to the airport. Luckily, I had my bosun mate senior chief was my escort, and it was really interesting because you got bonged off, and you probably weren't in the best headspace because of what we talked about earlier. And as we were driving away, he's like, "Hey, sir, did you see what's happening?" And I'm like, "No." So he had the driver stop, and he said, "Look back at your ship." And they were actually manning the rails. And I did not expect that. I could assure you I did not expect that. So that left an impression on me. And the other thing that left an impression on me was a simple email that I got from a major commander, a Navy captain that was in 06 command. And the email was, like I said, it was really simple. And it just had something in the subject line. I didn't even have anything in the text of the email. It just said, "It's not the critic who counts." And that's something that I learned as a midshipman at the Naval Academy. It's the man in the arena. It's not the critic who counts. It's actually the person who's in the arena that is doing the deeds. So that, I think, from a mental perspective, that put me in the right headspace. That simple email and that, I'm going to call it that, sign of gratitude. So, Mark, I think you had a question for me.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you to elaborate on manning the rails for our non-Navy listeners and Marines who've never been on ships. What does that signify, and why was that a powerful moment?
So manning the rails is when sailors, usually when you're entering port or leaving port, we call it really rendering honors to foreign dignitaries or other military officers. So you're going to have, sailors in uniform, standing at attention, topside on a ship to provide, that visible message of thanks and gratitude.
And I think that also, as you just say that right there was number one. It was social fitness, right? It was him sending you that email, reminding you of a truth that you had learned before. So that provided a foundation right there that you were able to stand on. And like you said, it framed your mental fitness at that moment. And just that, yeah, that's powerful right there. And the fact that you received it too, you received it and you brought it on board. And you're like, yep, that's right. Um, that's so awesome that you had that there for you at that moment when you most needed it.
And we talk about that QRF. A classmate of mine from the academy who had did his minimum time and got out. But we were instructors at the Naval Academy, and he heard what happened, and he immediately called my wife. I found this out later, and said, I could be in Turkey tomorrow. Do you want me to be there?
Wow. Yeah.
So, you think about those three things, and knowing that you had that support was important. And why was it important? Because at that point in time, I realized that, and this is no slight on the organization, so please don't think it is, right? The military is an organization. It's a machine. And it needs to be, and when you're not, useful to the machine, it moves on, just like any organization should.
Right.
And it was really interesting because I got asked to help with an article recently about commanders who got relieved of command. And the title of the article was, "They're not broken shower shoes. You shouldn't just throw them away." And arguably, from an organizational perspective, that's what happened. But from an operational perspective, I was really lucky to go to 4th Fleet in Mayport and work with some amazing leaders because they actually had the perspective of what it's like to be a ship captain and what can happen, what might happen, what could have happened that didn't happen for them, and they were able to keep moving on. And so because of some of the decisions that were made, I had to show cause for retention in the naval service because I was at my 18-year point. And so that really is a review of your record. But because of some extenuating circumstances with the grounding investigation, that took a really, really long time. And I say long time, like almost 2 years. And imagine not knowing what your fate was, personally or professionally, for 2 years.
Yeah.
So what do you have to do, right? You had to start focusing on something else. And I was lucky enough to have a mentor, and he was my Commodore. And he said, without any uncertain terms, you need to get myopically focused on something else. Otherwise, this is going to consume you. And he was 100% right. Mm-hmm. And it was really interesting because he said that day. I went home and I was on the computer looking at something, and up popped Ironman 70.3 Miami. You should do this. And triathlons were not my thing. They were not my jam, right? I had done a couple of sprint triathlons back when I was a young lieutenant. But, doing a 1.2 mile swim, a 56-mile bike and a half marathon. I was a runner at the time, but I definitely was not somebody that cycled. Matter of fact, I didn't even have a bicycle. And swimming, people give me a hard time, like, dude, you're in the Navy for 20 years. How can you not be a great swimmer? I'm like, I could swim to survive, because if I was in the water as a surface warfare officer, things had to have gone horribly, horribly wrong for me to get there. But for whatever reason, that little ad popped up, and I said, yeah, I'm going to do it. And so that allowed me to get myopically focused on something other than what I had going on. But what was the end result, right? When we think about that little resilience formula, there was obviously a physical wellness part of it, right? Because you got the swim, you got the bike, you got the run, but there was also a mental part of it, because it gave me, Mark asked, what would I do differently? Well, it gave me that time and space that I didn't have before to reflect on what really mattered to me and really explore that role versus identity thing. Think about, what do I really value and what needs to be part of my reality moving forward? Because as a naval officer, my values up to that point were honor, courage, and commitment. That's great at the organizational level. It's not awesome at the personal level to make career and life decisions with. So it gave me that time and space to really identify, define, and prioritize my personal values to allow me to make more informed and better decisions. And then it also provided the opportunity to connect with some pretty awesome people who happen to be triathletes. So it was kind of the trifecta. And really, my why at that point in time was to keep making progress. It wasn't about perfection. It was about moving forward. It was about taking one step at a time. That was my purpose, because I didn't know where I was going.
Yeah, Dennis, cycling and triathlons have been it's had a similar impact on my life as well. So I definitely could resonate with that. But before you started getting into triathlon, and that became a probably a holistic, right, way of really building yourself back up. I want to go back to the ship. Um, the Commodore was one person that was obviously even before you leaving the ship, probably a positive influence. It seems like, but walk us through a little bit, through some of the relationships you had there on the ship, some of your leadership priorities and methods that you look back at and you're like, yeah, I would change this. This was a lost opportunity. What are some lessons learned that potentially you could pass on to somebody who's like now in the pipeline to take command? I mean, you touched on it generally before about adding maybe mindfulness, but the ship schedules are crushing. There's like,
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
So to meet mission means dehumanizing majority of the people on board. So what, like, maybe with some more specifics, if you can, yeah.
One of the things, I was blessed with two amazing command master chiefs that always provided me with insight and always provided support and never hesitated to tell me when I wasn't getting it right. And, making sure as a ship captain that you're embracing that relationship with your senior enlisted advisor, and that it is a relationship that's based on trust and that's based on accountability is priceless. But also taking the time to identify those, I'll call them the game changers, those both officer and enlisted, that that you're going to be able to depend on when the chips are down, because it's going to happen. I remember my first underway as a ship captain, we were doing some exercises off the coast of Florida. And imagine you're first underway as a ship captain, and not your bosun mate senior chief, but your leading, bosun mate, your BM1, while you're doing small boat operations, breaks his leg and you have to do a medevac. First time underway as a ship captain. Right? So, that, things are going to happen. You need to know who you can rely on. But what does that require? And I think one of the things that I did that was really helpful was to get to know my sailors, both enlisted and officers, on a personal level, to understand, their why. How come they're in the Navy? What are they trying to get out of it? And how I could, as a commanding officer, help them get to where they want to go. And taking that time, I think, was probably the most powerful thing I could have done, and I wish I could have done more of it as a commanding officer.
Yeah, that's powerful. And what's the crew size on a frigate was what, about 150? Is that right?
Actually, at the time, because we deployed with an air detachment, so we had about 240.
Wow, 40. So you think about that as a leader, you're able to impact. And I also deployed on one of the frigates while we were there, and just the camaraderie. It's a small ship, right? So you see everybody all the time, right? It was not hard to do deck plate ministry as a chaplain because all I had to do was just walk around a little bit and you saw everybody.
Ministry by walking around.
You just see everybody all the time, right? So you do have a lot of face-to-face time, but I'm just thinking now for people that find themselves in a leadership position where they have a lot more than that they're trying to, lead. And I know, I've been in units with 1,000, 2,000, right? And then it's like, trying to, because you can't do it all. So then you're trying to, how if you will, multiply yourself. So you're trying to teach other leaders to have that same passion, to want to connect with people, to find out their why, right? And try to multiply that leadership style throughout.
And that's the character and culture of an organization. And that's one of, in my opinion, that's one of a leader's primary responsibilities, is inculcating the proper character and culture of an organization to do exactly what you talked about, Stephen, right? And character is, again, my definition, and I like to keep them as simple as possible. The character of an organization are the values of that organization in action.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, take us back now. So we heard, you kind of delved into to the physical fitness realm, which you found had so many other benefits. It gave you opportunity to think and process. It gave you opportunity to connect with other athletes and that social connection, and just how necessary that was to carry through that 2-year period. But bring us now to the end of that 2-year period, or kind of when you began to then make that transition into resiliency and coaching, and how that went towards the writing of the book.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that helped me in that transition was a veteran service organization called Team Red, White, and Blue. And, their mission is pretty simple. It's to connect veterans in their community through physical fitness, right? And their 3 pillars were health, people, and purpose. And that provided me an opportunity to interact with others in my transition. And I knew that I wanted to be in the coaching space. And how did I get there? Well, a couple of random conversations, and some that I had, and some that my wife had. And very often, Stephen, I get asked, well, when did you start coaching? Well, if we rewind the clock to when I was a leadership instructor at the Naval Academy, I was also a rugby coach. So my coaching started on a rugby pitch, and you got to see what it looked like to unlock the human performance of the next generation of Naval and Marine Corps officers in the sport of rugby. And I thought about, well, what would that look like if I did that for people's careers and their lives. And he said, well, if I'm going to do it, in my opinion, I'm going to do it right. And I'm going to make sure that I'm a certified coach. And that's why I chose to go to the Columbia University coaching program. Because I met someone through Team Red, White, and Blue who had gone through that program. And he recommended it. And so I went there. And I went there for a variety of different reasons. One was because of that credibility piece. Going to Columbia is not a bad thing, right? But also, I had spent so much time, in the military. I went to the Naval Academy, was in the military. I got my master's degree at the Naval Postgraduate School. I got another master's degree at the Naval War College. So I knew that I needed to expand the way I looked at the world because it had been insulated for a very, very long time. So that's another reason why I chose to go to Columbia, because I knew that it would allow me the opportunity to gain different insights and different perspectives that I hadn't considered before. And I also took the time to get certified in a couple of different assessments, so I could take a holistic approach to coaching. Because if you want to unlock human performance for career and for life, you have to think differently, you have to feel differently, and you have to do differently. And that's why I got certified in Gallup Strengths for that awareness piece. And that's why I got certified in emotional intelligence. So that way you understand how people think, how they feel, how they make decisions, how they manage stress, and then incorporate that into a coaching practice that looks at empowering people to be their best selves. And resilience is part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a lot of that's really the buzz right now. The whole word human performance and what that means, and so a lot of folks are looking at that right now, and it's just like you just mentioned. That's a great way. It's just a great term to say, how can I be my best self, right? And so as I pursue trying to be the best who I can be in everything, right? And then you begin to categorize it out to say, all right, well, how am I doing? Well, on the physical fitness side, and then mentally, and then spiritually, socially, and you kind of look across it. I remember when we spoke on the phone, you had 4 different terms that you used for those 4 things. Remind me of those words. And I remember the social fitness one was tribe, but remind me what those were again for you.
Mind, body, tribe, and why.
Yes. Yes.
And when I have coaching engagements, Stephen, part of every coaching session is I have my coaching clients grade themselves in those areas, and not anything overly complex, right? Are you green? Are you yellow? Are you red? If you're red, why are you red? Or if you're green, why are you green? What have you been doing? What has allowed you to do that? But I also have them examine their battery level in each one of those areas, right? Because again, it's not a PhD level thing, but I believe that we have a battery for each one of those areas, right? We have a mental battery, we have a physical battery, we have a social battery, and we have a spiritual battery. And just because you're green physically doesn't mean that your battery is full, right? You could be green physically, but your battery is empty. So how do you recharge? How do you relax? And how do you literally reconnect with yourself physically so you can re-engage work and life the way you want to? The same thing mentally and socially and spiritually.
That's great. And we use a very similar model for our listeners who are in Marine Corps units right now. We have our total fitness self-check that's part of our resiliency website in the Marine Corps. And so we have very similar tool where you just ask yourself, well, how am I doing in these areas? and you find out, yeah, am I green or am I yellow, orange, or red? Also, we have the combat operational stress control model that works with that um, same model. But then I don't think we've ever thought of the idea of the batteries, but that makes sense. Because we definitely talk about that a lot in our relationship training. In your relationships, it's important that you are getting recharged, right? And we talk about that. So what fills that battery up? Um, but that's a great thing to consider. How am I doing recharging my battery in the physical, the mental, and I can definitely relate with the spiritual, because I know for me, it's time every morning to go through uh, some of my personal beliefs and reading of sacred text and prayer and things like that recharges that spiritual battery for me. So that's
Yeah,
a great way of
and
thinking.
I know Mark has got a question, but I think one of the key things that we can do, because we've highlighted that time, right, is a resource that we can't get more of. So if you can, I like to call it activity stack, those activities that can recharge you in more than one area, it's important. And finding those activities and identifying them. But the biggest thing is making sure that they're part of your routine. And making your routine is the best thing that you could do as a leader.
It's interesting you say activity stack. Triathlons used to be kind of like that for me, especially swimming, right? I wasn't sure sometimes if I was sleeping, praying, or exercising while I was swimming, especially if you're doing long drills, right?
Yeah.
Like 3,500-meter swims. It's like but you kind of get this flow state, and it's such a interesting experience of like what is happening right now, and because it's not this hyper vigilant activity like a lot of other things, right? That
Yeah.
seems to burn fuel, figuratively speaking, whereas this one just seems like you're on kind of some weird cruise control. But with your wise part, right, which is a spiritual fitness, I was curious, how do you walk people through the ones you're coaching that space? Because the why can just simply come down to motivation, right? I'm thinking what you do is more robust than that. So I'm curious if you could unpack for those listeners who may be thinking, well, hey, don't mention spiritual to me. I'm not religious, and then there are some that are very religious. So for them, the spiritual is directly connected to what their beliefs, their religious commitments, right, and practices. And then you have the other spectrum of people like, what is that? Yeah, how do you help people through that?
So, I hopefully you guys don't, throat punch me through the video screen, but I am not the most overly religious person, but I am very spiritual. And one of the things that has helped me is Stoicism. And you're looking at it in terms of, well, what really matters and what can I control? And what really matters, I like to distill it down into three different things, right? What do you value? What do you expect? And what do you prioritize? Well, what can you control? And I think, Mark, this is kind of what gets to where you were going with it. Well, the first thing that we can control is what we do, right? Our actions. So if religion is something that really, really matters to you and needs to be part of your routine, well, you get to make the choice if it is or it isn't, right? So our actions, our behavior, our attitude, and our effort are really the big things that we can control. So identifying those things that need to be part of your reality to allow you to be the best version of yourself. And I joke very often, say it's really a simple math problem, right? What are those things that make you better? What are those things that give you energy? And do more of those. Add those to your life. And then what are those things that take away energy and make you your lesser self? And get those out of your life. So add the good, subtract the bad, and you end up being a better version of yourself.
So I got a follow up to that, where let's say you're dealing with a younger sailor Marine, right? So it's just younger people who maybe haven't sifted through their different value systems and their priorities, and haven't really reached the core yet. And so when you say what builds you up, what brings you down, kind of assessment, it can be very relative, right? Because some Lance Corporal in the Marine Corps might be like, "Well, what builds me up is, video games, Red Bull, and you know, just whatever else you could throw to that list, right?" And that maybe more mature people will say, "Well, I don't know if that's actually building you up," right? So depending on where they are, like, how do you avoid relativism? Because one person's definition of build up could be very different than another.
Yeah, and no, that's a great point. The key is spending time up front, identifying what's the objective, what are we solving for right now, and knowing that, in my opinion, gets rid of that relativity stuff. Right? If I'm solving for, hey, you know what, I'm a Lance Corporal and I want to make corporal. Okay, well, what are the things that we need to pay attention to? And you know what? Maybe video games might be part of it. It might not be. But knowing what people want to solve for, but more importantly, why they want to solve for it, helps get rid of that relative stuff. And, in my experience, making sure that self-awareness is present is the key to success. Because without that self-awareness, it's really hard to understand what barriers exist, what challenges exist, what support you need, and everything else.
That's great. Well, hey, thank you, Dennis. This is going to conclude our second 30-minute segment here with Dennis today. So we've covered a lot in our first two segments, but guess what? We're not done yet. So for our listeners, join us in the next segment where we're going to have some concluding thoughts and try to delve a little bit more into advice for our listeners from the experience that Dennis has had. And so please don't go away. Join us in our next segment, and we will continue the conversation. Well, hello and welcome back to the podcast. We're now in our third session talking with Dennis Volpe, a prior commanding officer of the USS Taylor, now a resilience coach. And so we've now, for a couple segments, we've talked about his journey from Naval Academy to now resilience coach, and some of his, if you will, experiences along the way of kind of having to look inward, to ask a lot of questions, to say, what's my identity? What's my purpose? What are my values? Which then have turned into now a full-time job for him to be a coach for others. And Dennis, we mentioned in the last segment that you had written a book, but we didn't quite get to that in our conversation. So let's start this segment there. Tell us a little bit about the writing of that book, why you wrote it, and where that kind of fell into the timeline.
Sure. Well, I wrote it last year.
Okay.
So, I think a lot of people picked up hobbies during the pandemic, and one of mine was to become a published author. So why did I write Transition on Purpose? I think there's a few reasons. I could give you the idealistic one that said, I wanted to share my story and provide people with the tools that they needed to succeed in life. Ultimately, that's exactly what it was. But what was the catalyst of me writing it? I had a lot of mentors, I had a lot of friends and everybody else that were literally bothering me about it. And the only way to get them to shut up was to write it. So at the end of the day, I wrote it because I wanted to write it, but I also had a whole bunch of voices that were pushing me in that direction. And I don't know which lever was bigger, but it got done. And what does it look like? Well, it's not a unique story, like I said earlier, but it's a personal story about my transition from military service. That's kind of part one of the book. And then part two was taking the Columbia University coaching framework a 3-part framework and then put transition on top of it. Not just transition from the military, but transition anywhere. You highlighted earlier, Stephen, about, your transition from being an enlisted sailor to going to seminary and college and, figuring that out. So how do you go through career and life transitions on purpose rather than on accident? And it requires really, 9 steps, at least that's what I came up with. The first one being identifying what your objective is. What are you trying to solve for right now? And then understanding what your values are and defining them and prioritizing them. And then really, embracing your reality. And, when I do coaching work, embracing reality is one of the first things that we do. And if it's a long-term coaching engagement, we embrace reality often. And I have an exercise that I do personally on a quarterly basis to examine my reality. And then it's illuminating your why. Because if you want to do purposeful work, you have to identify your strengths. You have to identify what energizes you. Because sometimes we're really good at stuff that doesn't energize us. And then identifying what really matters to you. What are those problems that you want to solve? And then who do you want to solve those problems with? Right? So who do you want to be in the arena with? Hooking and jabbing and doing that stuff. And then you have to identify what needs to be part of your life. Your constraints and restraints. And really identifying the operating, area that you want to be in. And then, so that's kind of the exploratory phase. And then, the action phase is identifying your tribe. Who needs to be part of your quick reaction force? Who are the mentors that you need to stay connected with? Who are the trusted professionals or experienced professionals that are in the space that you want to be, that you need to, gain the insight and advice from? Who are those sponsors, right? And what's the difference between a sponsor and a mentor? A mentor is that person who's going to show you the way based on their experience. And then a sponsor is the one who's not only going to show you the way, but they're going to clear the way based on their experience and the opportunities that they can provide. But also making sure that you have the energizers that you need to be part of that solution. And we talked about this already, having a transition or resilience toolkit that you have part of your routine. And then identifying, those mindfulness routines, those physical wellness routines, those social connection requirements, and those spiritual connections in terms of your sense of purpose. And the final thing is that plan. Because it doesn't make much sense, for this certified operational planner from a former chapter of my life to not have all those answers before you actually figure out what your plan is and utilize the military planning principles to develop that plan. Is it feasible? Is it adequate? What are your centers of gravity? And all of those things that go into military operational planning to actually plan your life. So that's kind of the 9-step process. And, it's available on Amazon. And I could, provide you guys the links for that. And, all the profits that I make from that, I donate back to 2 separate military veteran service organizations. One being Camp Resilience up here in New Hampshire that utilizes the outdoors of the Lakes region of New Hampshire to help both military veterans and first responders bounce forward in mind, body, and spirit as they transition to different chapters of their life. And then Camp Southern Ground, which does very similar things for military veterans down in Georgia.
Dennis, I love your story and how it interconnects with so much with veterans and the volunteer organizations and just people's efforts to just strengthen and improve the overall wellness of the larger DoD, right? Not just those who are currently active or but just especially the veteran population. And I'm curious on the side of the tribe, right? So you know, in the last segment we talked a little bit more about the why. As a chaplain, I can't tell you how many times I've worked with somebody who had personal stuff going on, and we are able to make some progress, and they get better. Their whole face changes, the eyes start, you know, shining. You're like, wow, this person in a better place. But guess what? The tribe is so toxic, right? And the tribe could be their family. The tribe could be like the people that are so close to them, it's almost impossible to separate. It could be their workspace, whatever it is. But man, you just grieve as a caregiver. You're like, "Ah, this person is making so much headway, and they're gonna be sucked right back into it." And there were so many times where I'm like, well, I don't know what I can do about that. And what do you run into with the tribe, and how do you help people?
So, you know, one of the things you asked earlier, Mark, were, you know, what are some of the lessons that you've taken from your coaching experience and really life experiences? And you know, from a former rugby player, you know, life is a contact sport. Period. Right? We're going to get knocked down. To your point, but the key to remember is that life is a team sport, and you get to choose your team. So choose wisely. You know, show me your friends are going to show you your future. So you get the choice to say, yeah, you know what, Mark is going to be somebody who challenges me to be better today than I was yesterday. So I want to make sure that he's part of my reality on a regular basis. And you know what, that Dennis guy, yeah, he's not helpful at all. So I need to figure out how, you know what, I spend less time with that guy. And that's hard for young kids. It was hard for me. But it's something that we have to do. Because if we don't, then we're going to get taken down. And we may be with a group of people that don't want to lend that hand and help you back up. And I was blessed to have friends and family in my life when I was in that valley. Not only, you know, were they willing to, you know, send a hand, but they were willing to get into that valley with me and hike back up the mountain. And I think that's the important part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally concur with Mark there. I can say I've had many conversations with folks that are trying to get to the help they need, and they lack the tribe, and in as much as you can try to help them to search to build that tribe to what it ought to be, so oftentimes, you know, some folks really struggle with that, you know, which actually, you know, brings me to another question that I thought to ask you is that, you know, is that, you know, your journey of, like you said, you kind of went through the valley there to ask all these kinds of questions. What are my values? What's my reality? You know, who are the people I need in my life? And you did that for yourself. And as you mentioned, I went through a very similar journey after being an enlisted sailor for 6 years. Um, and just, I knew that for me, my future in the Navy as an enlisted sailor just wasn't for me. It just wasn't happening. It wasn't my value. It wasn't my passion, my purpose. None of those things. So I got out of the Navy, went back to school, went to Bible college and to seminary, which is where I found it. It's where I found, for me, my sense of purpose. And so as you went through that list of things that you talk about in your book there, I was just sitting there going, yeah, I journeyed through all this stuff myself. Um, you know, but as we talked about, you made that decision to embrace these things and to figure them out. I made that decision, but do you think that there's people out there that are maybe struggling with that maybe they're on the fence right now and they're like, yeah, I know I need to journey through this stuff, but I just don't know if I'm willing to do it. What's your advice to those folks?
So my advice actually comes from a former POW from Vietnam, Captain Plum. I absolutely recommend that you search him on YouTube. But that advice comes from a Forrestal lecture when I was a midshipman at the Naval Academy from a long time ago, from 1993. And we're in alumni hall, and here's this guy in Vietnamese pajamas, and he's on stage, and he's walking in an 8x8 block for about an hour, telling his story of captivity and everything else. And the major message that he had was, life is all about the choices that we make, and choosing not to choose is a choice in and of itself.
Absolutely.
And that Forrestal lecture, that presentation has stuck with me since then. And I've actually reached out to him, on via LinkedIn a couple of times, just to say thanks, because of the impact that his words had on me that day, and how they've helped me move in a positive direction. So, my advice is make a choice and take action, because your deeds matter much more than your words do.
Yeah, that's great. And I know a lot of times that is the struggle. It's okay. I know I need to make this choice, and but for some that can be the real struggle to make the choice. And so again, just so thinking to now kind of transition a little bit, but on the same topic, think about, and I know you dealt with this as a commanding officer on a ship, but our junior enlisted folks, maybe some of, maybe they're at a, like I said, in the junior ranks, and they hit that life event that happens, whether that be something that just happened within their family life that they didn't see coming. Maybe it was something that happened to them, or maybe it was maybe a bad choice that they made, right? And they're in that place now where they're in that valley, right? Um, and they need to make that choice to kind of delve into this stuff, um, but they struggle, right? They're struggling with, what do I do next? How can I be resilient through this thing that's going on in my life right now? It's been a bad choice, got in trouble, or this bad thing happened in my life, um, to where they can get to the other side of it and bounce back. What would be your thoughts and advice for them today?
Well, it's funny, as I watch you, on camera, you kind of illustrate, the bridges transition model, right? Because you have optimum performance, overlaid with transition, and with transition is going to come uncertainty. With transition is going to come skepticism, and in order to get to performance, we need to have exploration, and we need to have action. And so how do you get yourself from that concept, or that understanding, or that literally arena of skepticism and uncertainty, into exploration and action? Because that's when you're going to get to performance. So what does that require? Well, it requires conversations. It requires conversations with yourself and people who matter to you, and people who are going to provide you with that sage advice and counsel that you need. Notice I didn't say the sage advice and counsel that you want. It's the sage advice and counsel that you need.
Yeah, that's so key right there, because you're right. It's not always what we want to hear. It's what we need to hear, and that can sometimes right there be. I know I've seen this, with folks seeking help and trying to get on that journey, is sometimes they're listening to the wrong voices, right? Sometimes they're building the wrong tribe. They're bringing people around them that are telling them the answers they want to hear, which are not the ones that they need to hear, which then is getting them off track, right? It's leading them down a path of, you know, well, just self-medicate, for instance, right? Just
Yeah.
go drink, right? Or yeah, the command doesn't even know what they're thinking. You're right. You're thinking the right way, and it's the command's fault, right? Or whatever it might be, right? Or and so you get those wrong voices around you, steering you in the wrong direction, and so that is huge.
And, Stephen, if it's okay, I like to say we all need to have that friend who's not afraid to tell us when we have spinach in our teeth, right? Like, hey, Mark, you know, and I was really lucky, or I am really lucky because I have a lot of them. And maybe because I need more support than the average bear, I'm not sure. But I remember I had a good friend tell me, Dennis, one of your superpowers is your calmness and your ability to deal with just about any situation that comes up. You don't get excited. You're so even keeled. It's amazing. And there was a pregnant pause. And then their feedback started. And as a result, I don't know when you're happy. I don't know when you're sad. I don't know when you're glad. I don't know anything. And that was a pretty good, that was a gut shot. And it allowed me to really see, because I took, all of the stuff that we've talked about for the last hour and a half, I took all that stuff and I put it in a box. Not only did I put it in a box, but like a good, military officer, I zip tied it and then I duct taped it. And then I literally put a chain around it and put it in a closet. I compartmentalized it. And which is good in the short term, but not good in the long term. And that conversation allowed me to see why openness and vulnerability is so important, and allowed me to really have those open and honest conversations with people that allowed me to really fully understand and appreciate what I valued and who I was and what I wanted to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely one of the key pieces of being resilient and bouncing back and going through hardship and difficulty and coming out the other side of it is that vulnerability. Finding those that you can really rely upon, that you can just be who you are, right? Open up. This is what's going on. But at the same time, the people that you're being vulnerable with, they're the ones that are willing to tell you you got spinach in your teeth.
Yeah.
What a great example, because that's what you need, right? And you just reminded me of a conversation I had with my daughter recently, she was trying to make a major decision point about her career. She's actually in the military as well, and she was trying to make a big decision. And I said, well, here's my advice, but don't just ask me. Think of 5 other people that you look up to right now, and she knows quite a few because we've been in the military, a long time. She grew up
For a quick minute.
yeah, she grew up in a military family, moving all over the place, and has had the benefit of a lot of great mentors to her, who are senior in rank now. So just call a few of them and ask them what they would say. Well, I think at that point, I don't think she needed to ask them that question, because I think she knew right then and there. She's like, yeah, I know what they're going to say. And she knew the decision that she needed to make, even though it was a hard decision, right? Yeah.
Mark,
Dennis, no, thank you for that portion of your response. And I'm curious, from the chaplain seat, I find that people who have either played sports or have some interest in sports, it's such a powerful metaphor. And I know you and I could probably talk for hours about how triathlons touch everything in life. It could be the ultimate picture on how to understand everything. But there's so many who don't, like they hate sports or they hate even anything that works up a sweat, right? Obviously, this is not your military type. Your military folks generally have to do it whether they like it or not. But you work with civilians now, and you have worked with civilians a lot. So those who don't have sport as a helpful metaphor, where they can kind of use it as a reference point for thinking about performance, thinking of batteries, right? These are all metaphorical pictures that help us gauge wellness at a broad level. How do you help them kind of cross that bridge? Like people just, performance is not even something they think about, because you as a rugby player, like this is very for you, I think from an early age, right? This is just very germane to your whole life.
Well, I mean, I think there's tons and tons of different examples that you can utilize. Um, you know, think about, take the resilience piece, right? Your mind, your body, your tribe, and your why. They're the 4 tires on your car, right? And if you're driving your car and one of those wheels is out of alignment, what is that doing to you? Right? If your mindfulness is not where it needs to be, you don't have the clarity that you need, you're not as focused as you need to be. Well, that's going to be, it's going to be bumpy, right? And now, guess what? Because I don't have that focus, because I don't have that clarity, I'm not paying attention to my physical wellness, right? I don't have a mindfulness routine. I'm not doing the exercise that I need to be doing. I'm not on the right diet. I'm not getting the right sleep. So now you got 2 wheels that aren't operating the way they need to. And you know what? I'm so busy at work, I'm not making the time to connect socially with the people I need to be connected with. So now you got 3 tires. So finding examples, to your point, Mark, that people can relate to, I think is the important thing, because performance is performance, right? Sure, you could throw human in front of it, but let's just, think about it, or your computer, right? How many apps do you have open? Right? Because I'm not doing this, so that app's open. I'm not doing this, so that app's open. Right? So now you got 16, 20, 27, apps that are open on your computer or your iPhone. What's the performance like now?
Okay. I think I didn't do a good job of explaining what was really kind of I was wrestling with. No, that was totally on me. So I guess the part of this that I'm thinking through right now is it's more aligned with hope, right? More aligned with, um, the sport metaphor is powerful for athletes because sport teaches you certain things about life through the sport. It teaches you about losing,
Yes.
super important. It teaches you about failure. And that's why you're probably even keeled. Goodness, I mean, getting your head smashed all the time in the rugby, broken bones and bouncing back up. So resilience becomes second nature to a lot of athletes. And so it's what a muscle memory. And that's why I find that as a chaplain, when I speak about resilience, a lot of people who have been through some kind of sport, it just resonates very easily and then
Yeah.
translates to life. But those who don't have a background, right? Now, and sometimes I can even use music. I've talked to musicians who also have a similar, right? A passionate musician is almost like a rugby athlete. Their fingers are bleeding all the time. I mean, just the level of rigor they have to put themselves through to play a tune or play something just right is pretty intense. But there are people who just not push themselves through anything that hard, right? Whatever field. And so the idea and the categories of resiliency don't really readily hit home. But when you speak that to an athlete, a lot of it sinks in because they've already done that through a sport, right? They've
Yeah.
lost, they failed, they've been disappointed, they've been humbled by teammates and all those things. So I'm curious, how have you or how would you approach somebody who doesn't have maybe that kind of baseline experience?
Well, and it goes back to, one of the things, I'll call it one of the areas of genius or one of the superpowers of a really, really good coach is to ask really powerful exploratory questions. And I truly appreciate, the sports analogy. But some of the questions that I do ask in that exploratory phase is, tell me about your greatest achievement. What was required for you to get there? And then let's talk about your biggest challenge or your biggest failure. And how did that happen? So I think it gets at the same stuff, just in a different way. But to your point, I think one of the things that I've learned over the past 5+ years as a coach is that I have ideal clients. And my ideal clients are the people that you talked about, that understand failure, that understand, they have that can-do attitude that, hey, you know what? I'll get this done. I just need a trusted advisor on my side to help me get there. And, there's some that I'm not the ideal coach for, because I expect resilience. I expect grit. I expect mental toughness. And when we're having the same conversations for the past, for 2 months straight, you know what? Maybe it's time for me to move on because I'm not the right guy. So that's probably one of my biggest lessons as a coach, is that I'm not the ideal coach for everybody, and everybody is not the ideal client for me.
I'm going to turn one of your questions on yourself. What is your greatest achievement as a coach in terms of like a person or a story?
I was able to help, and this actually happened last year. I was able to support a general manager in the manufacturing industry, particularly in the aviation and aerospace industry. During a pandemic where things were not as great as they could be, and really focused on them as a leader, and focused on them on the personal level and the professional level, so they could be abundant not only to themselves but to their team. And they got into a situation where all of the metrics were red. And I got to work with them for 6 months. And by the end of that coaching engagement, all the metrics were green, to include their personal resiliency metrics. And it was a $100 million turnaround for that company.
Wow, that's
by focusing on the resilience of the leader.
Wow, that's great. I'll tell you what, we are about out of time. And this has been a great conversation. And Mark, I really like that last question you asked. And it reminded me of something that, as you mentioned, how the athlete is usually an ideal candidate, right? Because, and I think you could probably take that also and say, anybody who's really gone through a significant amount of time in their life where they really worked hard towards something, as you mentioned, the musician or an athlete, and anything else, right? As I'm just thinking for Dennis, having, you're getting trained at the Naval Academy, right? That's 4 years of right, getting through that, right? Or whether it be like I even think for myself, a 1 year deployment in Iraq. That was a significant period of my life, right? That caused me to do hard things, to journey through that, right? Because when you do hard things, set big goals, it causes you to really ask a lot of these questions and delve through them. But man, we are going to have to end our podcast there. But thank you so much, Dennis, for coming on the show here and just being willing to talk about your journey. And it's so great to hear how you're utilizing that now, and even that last story that you just shared of how you would make that impact there within the business world. And hey, we're gonna have another podcast coming up where we're gonna interview more guests, and who knows, we may bring guests back on the show in a future date. So Dennis, we may tag you in the future. Who knows? We've talked about that idea. But any closing thoughts from Mark or Dennis as we conclude?
Dennis, if you can just also tell the listeners one more time how they can find you, right? So there might be people who want to reach out to you after this for different needs and different reasons. So if you could just put on blast your website, your email, different resources, your book, and just, yeah.
Sure. The easiest way to find me is through my website, which is Dennis-Volpe, VOLPE.com. And you can find my book on Amazon. It's Transition on Purpose. And you can also find me on LinkedIn. And, the Leadership Research Institute is really easy to find too. That's www.lri.com.
Yeah, thank you again so much. Tons of wisdom, a lot of quotables. I took notes and really excited for all you're doing and grateful. Thank you.
I appreciate the opportunity. And I think, the big takeaways for me and I kind of talked about it, is, for everybody out there, realize that life is a contact sport, and we're going to get knocked down, but we get the choice of whether or not we're going to get back up. And part of that choice is realizing that life is also a team sport. So make sure that you're choosing the right team, and you're choosing the right practices to help you continue to get better, because we can always get better.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Dennis, and thank you, Mark, and everyone that's tuned in. And please join us next time as we continue the journey of talking about just what it means to be resilient, to bounce back, and to pursue being holistically fit in all areas of our life, and just being on that journey of life.
This concludes another episode of the 0 to 100 podcast. Thank you all for listening, and until next time, be strong, be courageous.